Good morning, everybody. We are live for NFL Week 17 here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. It is Thursday, December 28th, one day later than typical, but a very good decision by the powers that be to move the show a day later in the week because we had a lot of things going on, from the market to injuries to player news. Last week, I felt like I left a few folks a little bit hanging with some of the indecisiveness on some of the games just due to news. And so today, we're a day later. We have a lot of things sorted, and we'll talk about everything that happened Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday here as we get going. As always, on the week previews, we'll talk about each and every game on the card. If you're watching during the live stream, welcome back for another week. If you're watching after the live stream has already aired, in the timestamps down below, you can use them to jump ahead to different games. So depending on when you're joining the stream, you can get to the game you want with the information you want, and hopefully it will give you something that leads to either form an opinion or act on an opinion you might have to make a bet. Lots of names already popping up in the chat. Appreciate each and every one of you for coming back for another show, but also for dealing with the scheduling inconsistencies this week. We'll go through and do a quick round of hellos. We're seeing Preston in the chat. Diana saying hello as well. We have VLAN Media. Hopefully I'm saying that right, back for another show. Devin Barth, as always, back for another show. Joe English, too. Good to see so many familiar faces back. David Rosansky. Merry Christmas, Adam. Hope you had a fantastic Christmas, too. Logan, Brian, Nathan, watching from London over in the UK. Got some international support for the show as well. Jay Karma, back for another one. Seeing, hello, Adam, daily listener as of this year. Love it. My wife and I have been listening today, and you keep referring to Crisp or Crisp Sportsbook. What exactly is that, or who is that? Speaking about Bet Chris, C-R-I-S, Costa Rica International Sports, one of the most influential sports books in the market. For some odd screens, you may also see it listed as Sports 411. There's also some ties to Bookmaker in there as well, different sports books, but carry a very similar line set. And so that is what I am referring to when I'm saying that. Good to have you in for another show as well. Also seeing Garrett back for another show, Ryan, Nathan, Bryce, Murray, and a few other folks in the show as well to get us started here on Week 17. So before we get into the games, just want to kind of reset and talk about why we're doing it on Thursday and what kind of got us here. And so speaking of Chris, very good question about some people may not know, and that's why we're here to answer some of these questions. Anything that I can do, anything that you guys have, please put it in the chat as we go. So perfect example. If you were here last week, you had me go off on a tangent about public betting percentages, public betting splits, and how it's really not a full picture and representation of market movement, because a lot of books wait for other sports books in the market that are more influential, that cater to a more sharper, if you will, customer base, and they just move their lines to stay in touch with those sports books, Chris being one of them. Perfect example this week. So games ended Sunday evening. Typically in an NFL week, you will see openers from Chris right around 4:30 to 4:45 Pacific time every Sunday evening for games the following week, which have had teams already play and finish their games from the week prior. So if there's any teams yet to play Sunday night, Monday Night Football, or any corresponding matchups, you won't see openers for those, but everything else hits the board. And so this week was a little bit unique in the fact that it was Christmas Eve, Sunday night. So we only had 5 games that were open on Sunday night, and the availability was very limited, whether that was people taking time away, whether it was the QB injuries, the extra games on Monday, whole bunch of things went into it. Essentially, the Sunday evening market for NFL as we know it did not exist this week. But where this gets kind of telling is on Monday, we saw still very limited availability, even as games finished. And if you want to look at the influence that Chris and other sportsbooks have on the NFL market, just go and look at the timestamps on Tuesday specifically. We finally saw full availability for an NFL week on Tuesday morning, right around 7:45 a.m. Pacific time, even a little bit later. And it wasn't until late in the day that you saw places like Pinnacle, places like regulated U.S. books as well that have apps now really fully open their markets. And everyone was handcuffed, just waiting for Chris and others to hit the board. And so if you want to just kind of get a really clear example of how things work in the market and how so many other books just copy the more influential places, this week was a perfect example. I don't remember the last time we've had an NFL week, let alone a week in week 17, where we have almost 4 months of data on these teams that really we didn't have a true market until Wednesday morning. It was pretty incredible to see that it took that long. And I'm wondering if we're going to get the same thing happen next week, as we have the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day split. And then, of course, week 18, there's no pre-established market with look-aheads or any prices. Could get pretty messy around that too. So it was a weird and sort of quirky week, which is why we pushed things back a little bit further this week to Thursday. And we'll judge what we do next week as well for the live stream, just because it's getting really kind of clunky here with the NFL market around the sort of holiday season, plus QB injuries, plus news, plus switches, things like that. So that's kind of why we are doing this on a Thursday, but also something to keep in mind as we look at the market going further as well. What a great sweater. Luke puts in some of the most backhanded comments ever. Lululemon, as always, you have to support the local Canadian company. I am beholden to supporting them as long as they keep making things this comfortable. And so this was a good Christmas present from the wife, and that is why we have moved on to the sweater. And so that is why we're in the sweater today rather than the hoodie. The wardrobe is expanding, but only from one store, essentially, as it just keeps getting a little bit bigger as they keep making more things. So that's where we're going with that. Okay. Let's get to it. We'll try to keep everything to 3 to 4 minutes today. There is no hurry. It won't be rushed, as media, for the most part, this week has taken a week off, so we can get into games where needed. If you have any questions, as always, put them in the chat. I said it's a challenge for everybody today. If you're watching the live stream, leave a comment in the chat if you're on the app. If you're watching afterwards, please leave a comment down below. You can do that too, and I'll get back and answer them. I'm going to wait for the view count to go up a little bit further as we get into some of the previews to talk about something that's quite important in regards to the service, but we'll get to that in just a second. All right, here we go. Starting off, Thursday Night Football tonight. For a change here on the live stream, it's the Jets on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland, a 7.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 34, but just before we came on the stream, saw Pinnacle go to 33.5. So that's the first time that we have seen the total go below 33.5. I don't have an opinion on the side of the total, unfortunately, for tonight, but I have a couple thoughts that I think could be useful. And so when this game opened, and again, it was scattered availability. Everything was this week. So even the openers were awfully light. But this was below 7 on the other side. And my initial thought was, this is getting a little bit high for Cleveland just from the role change perspective. We haven't really seen, with the exception of the Arizona game, where the Cardinals basically punted on the game on the road, starting a backup quarterback the week before Murray returned, the Browns laying a number in this neighborhood. Even with the Flacco return, the most we've seen the Browns laying is 3.5 points, and that was QB injuries on the other side. And so to go from that kind of neighborhood of points on the spread to be laying now north of a touchdown, I thought it was getting a little bit steep, because even as exciting as the Browns have been with Flacco coming back, the increased pass rate, we've seen how effective he can be. We've also seen the Browns get away with a lot of injuries up front, the disappearance of the ground game. Cleveland's done a very good job under Stefanski getting to the spot that they are. It's just, to me, it's like, okay, when does this become too high? And so I was looking all week. I'm like, how can I get involved with the New York Jets? And there's a couple of problems. First of all, just complete market disagreement. When you see something like this, 6.5 push through the 7 on a standalone game, right? It's telling you kind of where the side is shaping up to be. And that's definitely Cleveland. The second problem is, I don't know what the Jets offense is going to do. Trevor Siemian, and this is hard to believe. I didn't believe it. I went back and looked at it. He targeted Breece Hall out of the backfield on 33% of throws last week. That 33% is absurd for an elite wide receiver, let alone a running back. And so it's not difficult for the Browns to set something up to contain this. We've talked about it a lot. Chargers games often, when the running back in the passing game becomes the focal point of an offense, it's not hard to scheme that out. And so that's a big problem. Cleveland, I think, can absolutely manage that. And even if it's even if you are conceding 33% of targets again to a running back, the Browns are going to be pretty content doing that. Even against the Commanders defense, which is horrible, it barely got the Jets to the win. A third thing that I would say is I don't know what the state of mind is with this Jets locker room at the moment. I mentioned it on the podcast this morning. It's kind of a weird spot where the Jets are eliminated from playoff contention. It's been a disappointing season, obviously injury riddled throughout along the way. But the coaching staff has already got the vote of confidence. And so usually you see a team like the Jets in week 17 where you're trying to decide, has this team quit, or they're going to be another 1 or 2 game efforts for the coaching staff from the players to keep them around. The coaching staff has already got the thumbs up that the plans are to bring them back next year. And my question with the Jets for a while has been, how long can this defense continue to play so well? And against the Commanders, there were so many opportunities handed to them. Watching the broadcast, continuously, announcers were saying how this was as bad of a start as they had seen from a team all season. The Commanders were turning it over. They were giving the Jets every opportunity in the world. And even with Simeon, they weren't capitalizing on those and still needed the long field goal late to come back. And so I don't want to say that the Jets are a dead team, but I find it kind of a weird motivational spot for them now that everything is sort of settled. And this is just like an odd short week spot against the Browns defense that should be able to contain everything that they want to do on offense. And so I find this really, really difficult. I've really enjoyed some of these Browns overs, especially with these shorter totals. And this now is as short as we've seen from them. But I don't trust the Jets to be a good offensive partner on the other side to contribute their share to the total. And so to me, it's going to be a stay away, unfortunately, because it's just a little bit kind of clunky all the way around for both sides. And so stay away from me, a tough one, but I was really hoping to find a way in on the Jets, but I don't see it. And I don't want to go against a move like this in the market. Gerard says Cleveland has big home road splits. This is an interesting comment. What we're starting to see is a lot of the big and explosive plays that have gone against the Browns have just happened to be on the road. Down to down wise and like success rate wise, the numbers are not as like jarringly different as what it seems to be from basic counting stats and scoring metrics. So that's been something to kind of look at, as that probably will continue to be a very big talking point into the playoffs, but it's kind of being disproven in a way relative to how it's being spoken about in the media. Jeff says, Jets, Browns seems like a dead under game. Browns defense better at home. There we go again. Flacco faces the toughest defense he has faced all year. I got under 35 yesterday. I guess an important point to note is Amari Cooper is hopeful, was the designation he gave himself to play this week. He's one of the toughest guys in terms of playing through any injury designation. He's obviously been a massive part of this resurgence for the Browns, and just their willingness to pass. Big plays are continuously going through him. Joe Flacco, believe it or not, leading the league since taking over the starter in passing yards on attempts 20 yards downfield or more. So he has been absolutely firing it behind an offensive line down 4 guys. Hasn't mattered. The Browns are just throwing it a ton. David says, do you have any opinion on live betting sides? For example, if Cleveland scores early, is it worth a look with more points? So something I would say that is important to remember here. I get the sentiment. Browns get the kickoff to start, go down the field, score a touchdown, 7-0. It's like, hey, the Jets haven't possessed the ball. Getting a better number, so to speak, with the Jets probably around 11.5 in that circumstance. Like, is it better to wait and get it in play rather than take it pregame? When you're betting in play, let's say that Browns drive takes 6 minutes. And so there ends up being, say, 8 minutes and change left in the first quarter after the Browns hypothetically score on the first possession. The in-play line that you're betting is viewing the game with the time already elapsed and the current score in question. And so there's new information that is available that was not available pregame. And so when we're betting this game pregame, We're looking at a 0-0 game that is 60 minutes, and that's the viewpoint looking forward. When you're betting it in play, you can't really compare the two because it's a much different circumstance. If I was to sort of flip this question around and say, well, what would you do pregame if you knew that the Browns would be leading 7-0 with 8 minutes and change to play in the first quarter? Would you still make the point spread 7.5 for the Browns, or would you change that number? Everybody, of course, is going to answer, well, I'd change the number. I'd make it bigger. That's basically what in-play prices are reflecting from that spot going forward. So it's not a better price, and it's not giving you an advantage per se. You may find spots in play where the prices are wrong because price discovery is so difficult, but relative to the closing line pregame, it's not a better bet in the sense that you're getting more points. You're getting a different bet at that point in time of the game with different time left and a different score line than what you were looking at pregame. So that would be my thought on that kind of whole strategy in a whole. Paul Enzo says Flacco and Eli Moore revenge. Good point on the Eli. Yeah, that's Elijah Moore. I didn't think about that. I had the Flacco one in my mind. He was with the Jets for 2 years. Maybe some disgruntlement that he was not re-signed to the Jets after the Rodgers injury and fell to the Browns. Worked out pretty well for him, considering how the Browns have finished out. James says Jets are really rough offensively with no fire under the coaching staff. It's just a really weird spot. Something that I would say, Sebastian says, I like more under 33.5 receiving yards. Jets secondary good against number 2 receivers. Browns probably playing from ahead. So the Browns can't run because they have no O-line. There's a chance that Moore might become the number 1, but the Jets are really good against all wide receivers. And so interesting look there. Couple others wondering what yield you have following RAS. Well, this is a good time to bring it up. I'm guessing you mean yield in the sense of what is the record on the season. So we'll pull up the NFL service. The NFL service for the season, if you've been following NFL since it was offered, 52-29, 64% on sides and totals, plus 20 units, and that is betting all singles all season long. So there's no inflation based on 2, 3, 4, 5 unit plays. Everything is flat betting 1.1 or 1.15 to win one. So it's 64% on sides and totals, plus 20 units. Regular season, 33, 19, and 2, plus 12.1 units, and plus 7.9 in the preseason. All of these records available on handicapper.net for those of you who want to go through and look at it. But that is what the yield has been for those of you who have been subscribed to the NFL service. Has been a very good season to date, and hopefully something that will finish off the next couple of weeks with a few more wins as well. Couple thoughts on teasers were asked in the chat as well. No real opinion on that. Obviously, the Browns fit that basic strategy leg down through the 7 and the 3 with the short total. Let's keep going as we get to the Saturday night game, one of the better games on the board, and one of the better games we've seen in a long time, I think, as well, as it's the Lions on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. Interesting market. So this opened 6, was immediately bet up to 6.5 through the morning on Wednesday. Money came back, and then earlier this morning, we have seen the 6s disappear. We're as low as 4.5 at Circa, 4.5 at FanDuel. Chris was a little bit lower, now back to 5.5, which we'll call the consensus price across the board. Okay, so when this number was yet to open, Christmas Eve afternoon, and I was looking at this as the Cowboys lost to the Dolphins. We already knew what the Lions had done and clinched. This, to me, looked like just an awesome spot for Dallas. You have the Dallas Cowboys, 2 outdoor games, back-to-back weeks against difficult opponents, lose both, now going back to Dallas. And on the other side, you have the Lions, who with the Dan Campbell era in his 3rd year, have got back to the playoffs, won the division for the first time in 30 years. There was the emotional press conference, all the excitement. Everything was, how can I possibly bet Dallas in this game? Give me everything Cowboys. Here's the killer. It opened 6. I was thinking that there was a chance that with the Cowboys losing back-to-back weeks and the Lions winning and everybody hyped up about Detroit, that we could have seen this number get into like the -4 range, and it would have been a very easy decision on the Dallas Cowboys. What I've noticed, though, in the last 2 weeks is the market has not been downgrading Dallas. And so obviously they're a popular team. There's always a willingness to bet on them, and sportsbooks tend to take that into account and oftentimes have them on the higher range of their possible prices. I think that this was priced really, really well. And I've been surprised to see that even though they've lost these 2 games, they're not really viewed or like given a big dip in their ratings. And they've held pretty consistent despite the losses. And it's frustrating because they would have been a really good bet in this spot if the price was shorter, but there's just no way that I can be comfortable betting them at 5.5 or 6. Even at that 4.5, you're essentially still needing that 6+ point win, with 5 being a dead number. I just can't get there. I think that the Lions spot is just really good to fade in the circumstance, but the price, I think, is right. We've seen the total go through the roof. Couple reasons because of that. First of all, the Lions defense, I would say it's properly rated now because you're seeing it in market ratings, bottom 6 or 7. I think that that's fair. This is a really, really bad Lions defense that concedes a ton of yardage to opposing wide receivers. And the Cowboys are going to be able to move the football. They get their cadence back indoors. I harp on it a lot. I really think that it matters for this Cowboys offense with the rhythm and how they call plays at the line. When you get it in the controlled environment at home on turf with the crowd playing along, it just looks different. Play volume for the Cowboys, a difference of 10.5 plays per game on the road versus at home. There's just so much more tempo. There's so much more rhythm. It matters. Dallas is going to move the football on the Lions defense. There's not much resistance there for Detroit. The Cowboys defensively against the Lions, the more I look into it, is quite interesting. Jared Goff against cover 2 has been a disaster all season, and that's really been his entire career. Those Bears games where he struggled, it was cover 2. It was those similar defensive looks. He just struggles with it. We go back to his time in L.A. He's always needed McVay in the headset to read the defense. You've heard me talk about that if you listen to the podcast a ton. It's a massive talking point, right? He struggles to read coverages on the other side. But the Cowboys aren't going to play that. The Cowboys play a ton of man coverage. It's a defense with a pass rush for Dallas that is quite vulnerable to quick routes, especially if Gilmore's not 100%. This is a game where a guy like St. Brown could have a massive game behind that Dallas pass rush, up to quick routes, Goff getting out of his hand quickly. They're going to have success there. And Detroit, too, running the football against this Cowboys D-line without Hankins, that's a massive injury on the D-line. And the Cowboys just have no answer against the run. And it's more of a Bills running style that the Lions do in between the tackles than what the Dolphins did. But both teams the last 2 weeks have had success running on Dallas. And so I think the Lions have offensive success too. The total, it's too high for me to bet at 53.5. I think it's a fun game if you're looking at props. For those of you that play fantasy or daily fantasy, you're probably going to have a lot of attention here too. This is going to be a very fun game to watch. But unfortunately, the total's too high. And the side, I think it got priced well too. So you can't really get involved with this one. Would have loved to have a bet on Dallas, but it's I think the number is right, unfortunately. So that's how I look at the Saturday night football game. Going to be a very fun one to watch on Saturday evening. Let's get to the Sunday games. Dolphins on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore was a 3.5 point favorite across the board. They're now down to 3 -15 or 3 -20, circa low point in the market at -3. Total in this game is 47 or 46.5. We'll call the main consensus at the moment 47. Not a lot of movement on the total. I, again, don't have a strong opinion, but I have a lot of thoughts. That's kind of the theme of the week. I really wanted to find a way to bet Baltimore. Here's the concerning part with looking to back the Ravens in this game. First of all, they are an interesting team from a weekly motivational standpoint. I don't know if I've seen a team openly and blatantly disrespect an opposing quarterback in post-game press comments like the Ravens did on Christmas Day night following the win against the 49ers. It was just obnoxiously blatant for the disrespect they had for Brock Purdy and the 49ers offensive scheme. And they were gloating about knowing the plays before they were calling them, how predictable it was becoming. I've never heard a team and a defense speak about a quarterback like that openly in a regular season game, let alone a Kyle Shanahan-led offense. And once it got into like the point spread stuff and the underdog mentality, it showed, first of all, how great of a coach Harbaugh can be from a motivational standpoint. But it also kind of showed how the Ravens individually within that locker room, especially on defense, can really get up for a big game. And they certainly did that. And we saw it on the field. I mean, that was a domination by the Ravens that you don't see 49ers teams led by Kyle Shanahan get pushed around like that, especially on offense. And so to me, that was just like a massive all-in effort that we saw from the Ravens. Now, where I get concerned is they've had a couple of those this season where they've gone out and just looked amazing. And the offense was clicking. Lamar had big games. The defense shut out opposing offenses. Every single time this season, they have followed that up with a really down effort. And just, we have seen massive variance week to week from the Ravens. And that concerns me quite a bit, quite frankly, in this game against the Dolphins. Even with all the injuries that Miami has on both sides of the ball, there's still that like thought in the back of my mind that we can see the Ravens no-show like they have 3 or 4 other times this season following really dominant performances. I really wanted to look at fading Miami off of the win against Dallas, where they had some goal line luck, they had some turnover luck go their way, they had some kicking luck go their way, as well as having the Bills on deck in a massive game next week too. I thought that this was a good spot to fade them in Baltimore on the road. But there's just in the back of my mind, there's that feeling that we might see the Ravens come up with one of those lackluster performances following such an enormous win last week. Just gives me a little bit of concern. So I can't get there with the Ravens this week. Have to stay away from this one, unfortunately. So that's how I am looking at Dolphins Ravens. Couple questions. Steven, yeah, that was the playoff game. So again, very, very similar. That was a big rivalry when we saw how important that game was for the 49ers coming back against the Eagles. This was, to me, just odd and unique for a regular season game out of conference. It was a weird one on how that was spoken about, but that was a massive game for Baltimore on Monday night. Nathan, what have the Dolphins shown this season on the road against good teams for people to have any confidence in them in this spot? Not a lot. What I want to do, let me pull up the scoring margin from Team Rankings, which is a great site to always use. Again, I say this, I feel like every single year. You cannot control who is on your schedule. You can control how you play against the schedule. And the interesting point that I want to bring up is if you look at Miami as a whole, and Nathan, this is to your point. So Miami is 4th in scoring margin. They're averaging plus 9.9 points per game. At home, plus 17 points. On the road, plus 1.6 points. And so it's a pretty big drop-off, but Miami's still in both categories top 10 for scoring margin away from home and on the road. And so while it's a massive dip and the play looks different, that's going to be the case for every team. And so Miami is relatively still performed well regardless of where they've been. Now you can skew that to the competition. I get it. But it's a very similar story to Dallas, right? Where they've performed great and blown out some bad teams and then struggled when they step up in competition. I always have a bit of difficulty kind of like fully buying into that, especially this late in the season, because it's really been about how you've played. And to me, what's arguably more important is whether teams have been pushed or not relative to the totals than finding a spot where the side is overly under or overvalued. And so I don't know. I don't look at that and say like, well, it's an easy fade for Miami. I think the spot itself is more of a fade than just Miami hasn't done anything on the road. So that's how I look at it. Good point here, Connor. Both teams in fade spots. That's a really good way to look at this game. Both off big wins. Yes, that's a very good way to sum it up for sure, Connor. No question there. James Davis, Harbaugh Coach of the Year. I'm at kind of wit's end with any award talk, honestly. I hope no one asks about MVP. My stance on these awards is that they're probably my least favorite talking point in betting media in 2023, because every week it's like there's almost a mandate that everybody has to have a bet that's new on a coach of the year, MVP, OPY, whatever it's going to be. You either have to place a new bet and talk about it, or you have to be upset about the bet you already placed and still talk about it. And it's kind of annoying how it swings every week. And amid all of this award talk that we get just hammered with every week in betting media, nobody's ever talked with voters. It's not a stats-driven award. It's something that's voted on. To me, interesting content would be talking to people who are eligible to vote and seeing what they think and seeing how big of a difference it is from the stats to what these voters are thinking. I know that does not answer your question, but what I'm getting at on a tangent here is, like, I have no idea on any of these awards. I think it's a really cloudy year, and I think it's just kind of becoming lazy how it's like opinions and reactions every week to these odds that swing massively without actually talking about who is dictating what the awards are going to be given out to. And that's kind of how I look at it. So I have no idea on any of the awards is my answer to all of it. I don't know. And I really don't even have opinions on who should or should not win any of them. I do not want to vote for MVP. That would be a horrible job to be hit with. I'm sorry. I don't know. Next game. Pats on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, a 13-point favorite across the board with a total now down to 40. This was 40.5. I thought it was going to go to 41, and it's come back a little bit in the last 45 minutes, which is surprising to me because I think this is a game that could open up and have points scored. Oddly, Bailey Zappi has been able to move the football for the Pats consistently, taking over as a starter. And that, to me, has been a bit of a surprise and an oddity. But you look at some of the performances that he's had in the last couple of weeks as he has been the starter, the Pats are kind of turning into a bit of a sneaky over team because they had so much bad play for the first 12 weeks of the season that all their totals have been super short. But now you have the Pats offense contributing towards the score, and you have opportunities to move it on this Pats defense. And I look at Josh Allen and what he's done throughout his career against the Pats. He's had a lot of success. A big factor to that is the Pats defense every year, for whatever reason. It's been like this since I've been able to understand even the slightest thing about football. They just struggle against mobile quarterbacks. And we're seeing Josh Allen willing to run more in the last couple of weeks with Joe Brady as OC and these games mattering a lot more and the Bills making this playoff push. I think you can expect him to run more again this week. Now, the Pats are not alive for the playoffs, and so it's always difficult to say, like, are you going to get a big effort from them, and what is there to expect? We've been talking about how these wild card contending teams have just been flying over their posted totals. This is a game, though, where I think the Pats are going to be able to move the ball on the Bills defense, and we're going to see Allen find success moving the ball against the Pats defense. And so, to me, I was looking at 40.5 and saying, if this is less than 41, I think we see points. Now that it's coming back the other way towards the opener of 39.5, I think this is a little bit short. So looking at this one as an opportunity, nothing super significant, but I would look to the over or nothing at less than 41 in this game. There's also not a lot of significant weather. You never really know with Buffalo this time of the year off of the lake and everything that goes into weather around Buffalo and how ugly it can get. But all the weather forecasts as of Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time look relatively stable for this one in Buffalo. So I think this is a game where you're looking at the over or nothing. From the side, my hesitancy with Buffalo laying points in this game would be the fact that they have a massive game against Miami next week. Buffalo in the position that they are in, not one to have an opportunity to take the foot off the gas, but that would be the one hesitancy that I would have with laying the Bills side in this game. Eric says the MVP voting should make it a fun one this year. The new MVP voting. I don't even know what the new MVP voting is. And so that's probably a good thing that I don't have an opinion on the market either. Tell me more about that, if you will, in the chat. I have no idea what's going on there. Maybe if media would talk about it instead of just matching their opinions to awards and then complaining week after week, we could talk about that. But to me, that's much more interesting than just opinions on the awards markets. Falcons on the road at the Chicago Bears. Chicago, a 3-point favorite with a total of 38, and this 38 is trending down. I could see under money continuing to come into this market with this being a possible weather game. You have the Falcons, an indoor dome team, going on the road to play at Chicago. Could be very cold. Looks like possibly below freezing temperatures. Nothing substantial from wind, but in that 15 to 20 mile per hour mark, which is where we start to see an impact on totals. And so I think there's still going to be some under money coming into the market, bringing this total down. From the side perspective, we are seeing the Bears 305 at FanDuel, 315 at Circa, 3 - 10 at Chris, kind of leaning towards 3 - 105 there. Falcons are nothing with the points. Here we go again. For those of you sweating the win total, you're in for a treat as we got 2 games left to hopefully get us there. But this is to me Falcons +3 or nothing. Chicago does have a potential matchup advantage with Fields running the football against this Falcons defense. Atlanta's been very bad at defending mobile quarterback runs, which is weird because they've been very good at defending runs to running backs all season long. So a bit of an odd split there. So I do think Fields could do some damage with his legs. My concern is, what is Fields going to do with his arm? DJ Moore dealing with the ankle injury. If he goes, he's going to be less than 100%. That's impactful. We saw him basically finish the game last week as more of a decoy than any sort of impact player that he usually is on the game. You have Cole Kmet also dealing with an injury. So your 2 top pass catchers and 2 biggest offensive weapons, both very banged up for Chicago in this game. Atlanta got help back on the defensive line last week. For the first 10 or 11 weeks of the season, they were top 3 in EPA against a run, success rate against a run. It fell off because they lost key starters on the defensive line. Now, most of those guys are back with the exception of Grady Jarrett. So that run defense for Atlanta up front bolstered quite a bit. And so if you're thinking about this game and kind of how it might progress, you have cold weather, you have wind, which will impact passing. You have the Bears down offensive skill players at receiver and tight end. It's very likely that Chicago is going to lean to running the football more than they have in recent weeks. But you have the Falcons defense improving in that area and returning to their earlier season form, should be able to match up well against it. And the Bears still have this kind of like muddled backfield situation to begin with, which makes things complicated too. So to me, this is a spot where Atlanta has a pretty clear path. Now, the big question is, what are the Falcons going to do on offense? Chicago has been very good defensively, trending up, getting a lot of support from pro bettors. This is the first week in a while where we have not seen market support for the Chicago Bears. And I think that's just because of the price point, the conditions, and the injuries for Chicago. Heineke did not make any mistakes last week for Atlanta, and we really saw what the Falcons can look like when play calling's not getting in their own way, when Arthur Smith is letting the top guys get involved, and they're not just making back-breaking, crippling mistakes in the red zone on every other drive. They look like a very competent football team. It's what they should have been all season long. Unfortunately, now we're down to the final 2 weeks, and it's a tough spot. And so Falcons are nothing getting the points in this one for me. Ryan Roberts says, what has Chicago done to be worthy of a favorite? Falcons season on the line too. It's a good point with Falcons season on the line. Elimination game for them. The Bears defense, as mentioned by Joe English, has been very good as of late. So you have that. You have the Bears the last, I would say, 5 weeks, tons of support from pro bettors. They should have beat the Lions twice. They had a dominant performance against the Cardinals. The Bears have been sneaky good since Fields came back from injury after that Saints game. So a lot to be optimistic about for the Bears, and pros have shown that in the market. But now this just this just seems like a spot where it's Falcons or nothing, and we've kind of hit the level for the Bears from a pricing perspective. A couple more questions. Nathan says, last week was the only sweat-free Atlanta game all season for backers. That's very true. Lucky enough that we were on them, Rich. I do not have an Atlanta Falcons jersey, so that will not be happening. I've been saying for the last month that the win total is coming down to a fourth quarter drive against the Saints in week 18, so that could absolutely happen. Morgan says, hey, Adam, do you have thoughts on Arthur Smith's coaching stability long-term? Lifelong Falcons fan, have not been impressed. On board with the season win total for you. It is a group sweat for the Falcons win total over. Think he has to go at the end of this year. There were reasons to believe coming out of Tennessee that he could have sort of a forward-thinking offensive mindset. And this could very well end up being a case of a good coordinator getting into the head coaching role and just being over his head. What's been different for me with Smith this season, fantasy guys will criticize him all day, rightfully so. I feel like we've seen a different side of him now that he's doing more media. He does the McAfee show, but he's been more involved in media too. And just the way he's explaining his thought process, the way that he's explaining decisions with personnel, the new kind of found arrogance that has really been sort of at the forefront and how he's approaching game situations too has been really kind of off-putting and odd. I've just got a very different view of him in the media this year compared to seasons past that has made me think a lot different about him. And then you just have this like mountain of fantasy analysis for how misused a lot of the stars on this team have been that is going a long way to kind of support that. So I think that the Falcons would be better off with another coach rather than Arthur Smith at the helm. Let's see what they choose to do in the offseason. The next 2 weeks are going to go a long way to determining whether or not he comes back or not. So that's kind of my thoughts on Arthur Smith for sure. Zach Moss says future OC. There's so many guys in the league that are just better as an offensive coordinator than they are as a head coach. There's the want to take that next step. I get it. We need to get to a spot with how important offenses are in the league where you have a coach that just facilitates, and then the offensive coordinator role becomes a massive importance, more so than it is now within the team. Moonfish says Falcons should have 3 to 4 more wins. Smith is a joke. Bijan could have made up for Ritter's horrible play if used properly. I agree with having 3 to 4 more wins, but nobody has been a benefactor of misguided criticism more than Bijan Robinson this season. And Ritter and his play and his mistakes have given Robinson a free pass because Robinson, even when given usage, I get he's been misused. He has had some horrible games and made some horrible mistakes, but it's almost like illegal to say anything bad about Robinson because he's this fantasy stud. And as soon as you do, you have a lineup of fantasy guys coming to criticize you. But nobody's talking about his awful fumble a couple games ago. Nobody's talking about a couple games in the middle of the season where he had 10 plus carries and was putting up success rates in the 15 to 20% window. Like, I get Ritter's been terrible and made mistakes, and Heineke's not a whole lot better, but Robinson's not void of criticism too. He's had some awful games this season. And so it's been bad all the way around for the Falcons. I'm not saying Robinson is a bad running back and not deserving of more carries. He is, but Ritter there's that meme of the guy leaning over and taking all the bullets in the back. Ritter's been that for Robinson in some of these games where he's completely no-showed. And so that's an interesting situation too. But absolutely, the coaching has been bad. The player usage has been bad. It's been all shades of bad for the Falcons, and yet they still have a chance with 2 wins to end up going over their win total. Blue FM says, this 66-year-old Canadian who has enjoyed and attended many world-class sporting events, find myself pleasantly surprised and proud of the content and presentation with Adam Chernoff. Class act mate. Very nice of you to say that. I appreciate it very much on that comment. Hopefully a few more shows to go to finish out the season, can continue on with that sentiment. Good time now with more than 300 people on the live stream to bring up the fact that we are running a bit of a special. over at raspicks.com/order. The remaining weeks of the NFL season through Super Bowl, all of the plays are available on site for $59. And so we brought up the record earlier, talking about how good it is going. You're probably realistically looking at 5 to 8 more sides and totals between now and Super Bowl. And so if you have yet to join the service and you want to try it out and see what it is all about, you can go to raspicks.com/order. The season pass is now prorated to $59, which is awfully low for where it's been all season. Just looking at the run out of the final games this season. If you'd like to get on board, that is available now at raspicks.com/order. Let's keep going as we get to the next game. Titans on the road at the Houston Texans. Houston -4.5 with a total in this game of 43.5. This is the game on the board that I am the least excited to talk about of the entire week. Houston, more than likely, and please let me know in the chat if there's been Stroud news in the last 45 minutes that we've been on the stream. Let me know. My expectation pre-stream was that he would very likely be starting in this game. Was looking at reports in that 65 to 70% range as he got to stage 4 of the concussion protocol. There was one more step to clear. Looked like with the importance of this game too, that they were pushing for him to be back. That to me is why this number, which was down at -4, was trending back towards -5.5. It was just QB news related. So if there's been an update to that, please let me know. I agree with this. If Stroud is announced in and this gets to 6, I don't agree with Titans being a bet. I do agree that it would push towards 6 if Stroud is confirmed in. We also don't know on the Titans side if it will be Levis or Tannehill. There was not a massive material difference when we saw Tannehill start last week. Henry was more involved, looked a little bit more comfortable. I don't have a lot of thoughts. The Titans have so many defensive injuries. They're this straight pass funnel defense, but now you can run on them. Houston with Stroud back should be able to go either way that they want. But then do you want to be backing a Houston Texans team with the quarterback coming back, laying a much bigger number than they've been all season against this Titans team, not knowing if Stroud is going to be 100% or not coming out of the protocol? It's just, it's a tough one for me to really give any value here, nor to have much of an opinion on. And so I'll leave it at that and say that it is a stay away. Really not a lot to talk about in this game. Fortunately, the next game up is one that we have a ton to talk about. It's the Raiders on the road at the Colts. Indy, a 3.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 43.5. Easy decision, Colts laying the points. Like this one this week. It was also one that we were on at a better number in the service. Still think this is better at still think this is good at anything better than 4, backing the Colts at home. Let's talk about the Raiders. We touched on the Ravens post-game press conferences. For those of you that were maybe amid the gift opening, running around with kids, whatever you had going on Christmas Day morning, maybe you had the Chiefs and Raiders game on the TV. Never mind how the game progressed to the final score and how it got there. We'll get to that in a second. To me, what stood out at the end of the game, clock hits 0, Raiders win. The camera goes to Antonio Pierce on the sideline. He is standing on the sideline as a head coach of a Week 16 game for a Raiders team that has their playoff hopes clinging to life support. Straight head up, relief, emotional, crying on the sideline, crying in the post-game press conference on field, crying in the post-game press conference at the podium. Enough is enough. We've got the monkey off our back. We came into KC. We got the win. We're Raiders. He's pushing for his job that is now partially solidified, at least his cases, to be the coach next year. That game just is the epitome of the in-season Super Bowl. I mean, it was just an all-time massive win for the Raiders. And you have a coach that's crying on the sidelines after winning a Week 16 game for a team that has a losing record. I mean, it was a massive game. And then you think about how the game got to that point. Aidan O'Connell completed 9 passes in the game. I believe he did not complete a pass in the final 3 quarters of the game. You have the 2 defensive scores. There was no offense for the Raiders at all in that game whatsoever. End of story. And The same can really be said for the entire tenure as a starter for Aidan O'Connell. If you go to rbsdm.com, runningbacksdon'tmatter.com, it's a Ben Baldwin site, has all the EPA tables, has the success rate tables, has the QB rankings tables. If you sort the entire league from week 9 to now, which is when Aidan O'Connell took over as the starter, and you go on the quarterback tab, so it shows you all the quarterbacks. If you put 150 QB snaps or more, you will have 40 quarterbacks listed in EPA plus CPOE, which is a composite metric used to judge quarterback performance. EPA and completion percentage over expectation. You sort the league. You get an output of 40 quarterbacks. Guess who's number 40? Aidan O'Connell. No quarterback has been worse in the NFL on field since week 9 than Aidan O'Connell. Bottom of the barrel, worst in the NFL. That's been the Raiders' offense since taking over. And it shows that the Raiders are getting some of these wins. An all-time luck box road win against the Kansas City Chiefs that was just fueled with emotion, following a week where it was the Raiders against the Chargers team that visually, emotionally, and physically quit on their coaching staff, running up the score and scoring nearly 70 points despite having less than 400 yards of offense. It was a shutout against the Vikings. The Raiders' offense has done nothing with Aidan O'Connell. He has been the worst starting quarterback in the NFL since week 9. And now you're telling me that the Raiders are only giving the Colts 3.5, where you're backing the Indianapolis Colts, who have a better coach. They're the better team with the better quarterback at home in an elimination game that they must win to stay alive for the playoffs. I'll take the Colts in this one all day. This is going to be a massive Jonathan Taylor game. Everyone's been able to run on the Raiders all season long. We don't know what's going to happen with Pittman. We don't know what happens with Moss, but Taylor's going to have a monster game in this spot. I'll happily take the Colts here going against the very popular and trendy underdog Raiders. Easy fade for me of Las Vegas in this game. Next game up, Panthers on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Jags laying 6.5 points with a total in this game of 37.5. That total is down from 38.5. When I look at this game, obviously the status of Trevor Lawrence is significant. We don't have confirmation, but everything about how he is being sort of given leeway on a week-to-week basis suggests that he is going to be the starting quarterback for Jacksonville in this game. And I say that because last week he was given the luxury of being able to practice on a Saturday when the rest of the team was not practicing, just in order to be able to clear concussion protocol. And so with this week, the shoulder ailment, again, he's as banged up as any quarterback in the league. But I do think that we are going to see him out there on Sunday. And I do think that that is going to go, obviously, a long way for Jacksonville. What worries me about the Jags is you're starting to really run out of weapons. You're already without Christian Kirk. Zay Jones looks likely to miss. You have guys banged up on the offensive line. The ground game has gone away. There's just not a lot of offensive output optimism for the Jacksonville Jags in this spot. And you're looking at them with the 6.5 next to their name. That gets really tough to get comfortable laying that number with a banged up quarterback, so many skill guys down, an offensive line in shambles. And what's starting to stand out to me is if we look at the last month of performance, this Jags defense that was top 10 for the first 12 weeks of the season, 27th in terms of defending the pass, and against the run, they have fallen off a cliff as well. This was a defense that was among the best in the league at defending the run, all the way down to 20th. And so this is a Jags defense that is completely reverted from how good they were in the earlier portion of the season. Not the case anymore, and downtrending on a weekly basis. The Panthers, on the other hand, are actually kind of turning around. You look defensively, the Panthers for the majority of the season, 31st, 32nd. All of a sudden, the last month against the pass, they've jumped up to 18th. They've also been a lot better against the run. They were bottom of the barrel against the run for the duration, really, of the season. The last month, all of a sudden, Carolina jumping up 17th against the run. And so this coaching change for Carolina with Tabor coming in from a different side of the football, you have Reich out. All of a sudden, they're playing visibly a lot harder on the field. The defense is stepping up. Defense has been solid against the pass. And offensively, they're starting to find at least a little bit of something. It's not good. It's not a lot better, but it's not just this dead offense like it was for the first 3 months of the season. And so it would be Panthers or nothing for me, but I wouldn't take Carolina at 6.5. So let's see if Lawrence gets announced in. Remember, look ahead here was Jags at 9. We got some wiggle room here. If Lawrence is announced in, it hits the screen. Maybe Zay Jones is able to go. I think this will push up to 7. Panthers become interesting at that point. Wouldn't take them at 6.5, but I do think if they do get back to 7, Carolina would be an interesting look on the side. Please, guys, keep the questions coming in. Post them in the chat. Would love to have any questions that you have about the games this week. Anything else that I might be able to answer. In a good mood. Feeling a little bit feisty and festive here with some hot opinions on certain topics that are going around the betting space too. So please feel free to fire in the questions into the chat. Rams on the road at the New York Giants. New York, a 5.5-point home underdog total in this game, out to 44.5. Rams overs are getting blasted on a weekly basis. We saw this number as low as 42 earlier in the week with the news that Taylor would be starting at quarterback. Over money comes into the market, and we saw an interesting kind of course of movement yesterday. And so the news that DeVito was benched, thankfully, rightfully, some of these bad quarterbacks, they got to go. So the league is better off with DeVito on the bench. So are the Giants. You get Taylor in. There's a professional at quarterback, unlike what the Giants had for the last couple of weeks. And you kind of have a better outlook for their offense. And so we see the Giants become a bit more of an over team with Taylor in under center. You, of course, have the Rams as this dead over team too. When the news was announced that Taylor was the starter, this number was sitting right at Rams -6. It went down to Rams -4. There was that wave of money that came in, but was more telling to me was later in the day yesterday. It was about 4:30, 5 o'clock Pacific. Wave of money comes back in on the Rams. Not only does it move it back to where it was, but when you're thinking about kind of the order that these bets come in, right? You have the news that fuels the move on Taylor that brings the number down. So there's bets coming in on that. Then you have the move that goes back the other way equally, and now in some cases further. That later move, a lot more telling than the first move. And so it's like all of a sudden, not only are you seeing over money, but you're seeing Rams money come into the market. And you're starting now today to see reasons why. You look at the Giants defensive line, multiple guys banged up, and the outlook for them not very positive either. So the Giants could be down multiple starters on the defensive line. What does that look like for the Rams? Well, it opens up Kyron Williams in the ground game. This Rams offense, when able to operate out of play action, just deadly, especially when that ground game is working. You also think about the Giants defensively. It's Wink Martindale, a lot of blitzing. He never changes. He does the same thing every single game. Well, you think about Williams as an outlet option, but also timing runs against that blitz. Rams can really counter that quite well. And so it's a spot where you can look at the Rams offensively, especially if these guys up front on the defensive side for the Giants are unable to go. You could see some pretty big plays emerging for the Rams. And so I agree with the move on the Rams. I agree with the move on the over. I'm not super intrigued by the over currently at 44.5. If you are looking at 5.5 for the Rams, it would be that or nothing for me in that game against that Giants defense. I think it's a big offensive game potentially again for the Rams, which are continuing to click pretty good on offense. Couple questions. No more Tommy Cutlets. Good. As a Giants fan, I'm disappointed that the tank commander, Tommy Cutlets, has been benched. You should not be disappointed by that. I get the draft standings. You're in a better spot too. Tyrod is an upgrade. I definitely agree with that, Murray. But we're seeing the market speak out pretty significantly about that as well. K-Hawk, as a Giants longtime fan, it seems the last few years they make a meaningless surge at the end of the season. This results in us never getting top draft choices. Understand frustration. I understand where you're going at as well with that too. Good comment from Leo. The show has become a part of my week. Thanks very much for making it a part of your week, Leo. I appreciate that very much. Deuce of Heart says 295 people watching and less than 100 likes. Come on, guys. Hit that thumbs up. Adam is here for us. Not too much to ask to get the click like. You are now promoted to the official marketing manager of the show. Deuce of Hearts. Very good tweet there. If you do have time to hit the thumbs up down below, would appreciate it very much. Joined the show late, Evan Norton. Have we talked about the splendor of Chambers Bay yet? What was the score yesterday? Caddy Steve got me to an 82, a tidy 82 from the back at Chambers Bay. Special place. Need to get a frame for the flag. New thing that I'm going through is any of the top courses that I end up playing, getting the flag and putting it in a frame and keeping it as a memory of the course. So that's what you're seeing in the background. Anyone who is a golfer on this stream and you have a chance to play Chambers Bay or go out of your way to do it, if you're fortunate enough to do so, could not recommend it highly enough for anybody to get out there and play it. That is a very, very special place that I'm holding in high regard for the rest of my golfing life. Let's keep going. Morning games still. The way that they've staggered these morning and late games are really something this week. Arizona Cardinals on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia an 11-point favorite at Chris. 10.5 almost everywhere else. Total in this game is 48.5. So what stands out to me here that would make me look Eagles or nothing in this spot is Kyler Murray hit the injury report yesterday with an illness. Why that's significant to me is because we have seen that with, I would say, about 25 to 30 players in the last 3 to 4 weeks. And the performance dip of those players following in that game week where they have this illness that is designated has been significant. Now, unconfirmed that it's the same flu-like illness that's going around and impacting all of these players. But if it is, and you get Murray with that similar performance dip that we've seen other players who have that as well, I have no idea what Arizona is going to do offensively, because you have Marquise Brown dealing with the heel injury. There was a report yesterday that said that he was less likely to go than he was likely. Last week, with these injuries that Arizona has accumulated, the leading wide receiver had 2 receptions in that game against Chicago. And so now it's another road game for Arizona at Philly. I know that there's not a lot of excitement about the Eagles offense, but against this Cardinals defense, Philadelphia is going to have it pretty easy. And so if you have Murray dealing with that and you have some of these other injuries to skill guys, this is grim for Arizona on the road. So I really am kind of keeping an eye on that and would recommend everyone else do the same, because if that does carry over and that designation carries with him, we're going to see that injury. We're going to see that illness have an impact. It's impacted everybody else. If that impacts Murray, that's trouble for Arizona. And so keep an eye on that. And there's a point. Murray has not been that good when healthy. He really, really hasn't. So if you take a drop off of that, there's just not a lot of optimism here for Arizona to do much on offense. And so to me, it would be Philly or nothing, but I am watching that illness report around Kyler Murray this week. I just really don't think this is a good spot at all for the Cardinals on their back-to-back road games. Saints on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay, a 2.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 42.5 across the board. Unfortunately, we didn't do the stream yesterday when Saints were at 3. Thought Saints at 3 was the look or nothing. At 2.5 would still only look Saints or nothing, but it is kind of stretching the boundaries of how far you might be willing to go with the price. So the Buccaneers, 4 wins in a row. We're seeing their market get to a sky-high price. Saints, on the other hand, off of the ugly one on Thursday Night Football that everybody was watching, that proceeded. No, that I mixed up my words. That followed. There were 2 very misleading wins that preceded the ugly performance on Thursday Night Football. There we go. Had a bit of a brain twist there. But what I'm trying to say is it was the Panthers and the Giants the 2 weeks prior at home for the Saints. Very comfortable games, very winnable games. And they didn't look that great in those spots. And then they went on Thursday Night Football and just got the doors blasted off by the Rams. And so now they come into this game The stock was not high on the Saints to begin with. Now it's even lower, and the stock on the high, it couldn't be higher on the Buccaneers off of 4 straight wins. So it's that high versus low in the market that you always want to look for late in the season. And now there's market support in the direction of the Saints, which is really indicating that New Orleans is the side in this game. There's also the question here that's going to get brought up in media. This is the first time the Saints have played outside since September. It was either the last week of September or the first week of October. The way that their schedule has fell, every game has been indoors for the Saints since week 4 or 5. It's been this run of indoor games, obviously a dome team. Now they're going on the road outdoors. The counterpoint to that is the weather in Tampa Bay for this game looks clear. And it's no longer the same surface at Raymond James Stadium where they could water the piss out of it and slow down any indoor team like they used to do. That's just not the case anymore. And so I think the Saints are going to go in, and with Olave now 100% healthy, with Shaheed getting rightfully more snaps, he had like 85% last week, we're going to see these guys have the opportunity to make big plays downfield against this Buccaneers secondary. I don't know how the Saints are going to approach Kamara out of the backfield in the first game against the Bucs defense. With all of the pressure that Bowles brings and all the aggressions that he has up front, Kamara had 13 catches but did nothing with it. It was that game where he had 13 for like 35 yards. And so I'm going to be curious to see if there's an adjustment for the game plan, how they handle that. We may see that revert quite a bit. There's also the extra rest in this spot for Taysom Hill. He was dealing with a couple injuries, so he could be healthier too. This just off the extra rest, a gotta-have-it game for both sides. But for the Saints specifically, I think this sets up decently well for them. So would only look Saints or nothing in this spot at 2.5. But you're losing the 3. Still could be good, though, in this game. Nathan says, does this game suit the over-narrative of 2 desperate teams playing for their playoff lives? So wild card teams in conference the last 3 weeks as the playoff pictures really emerged, and we've got to this point where these games and the importance of them matter so much. 9 straight overs in those matchups. You can kind of put the Buccaneers in that category. They are leading the division, but with how tight the South is, I would say, Nathan, that this would. And again, just kind of how I was thinking at it and looking at it, you have an overrated Saints defense on one side. You have a Buccaneers pass funnel defense on the other side. You have Mayfield playing very well, and you have the Saints wide receivers back to full health. You're probably looking at that case for sure in this one too. So it's not that full-on isolated wildcard team versus wildcard team look that is fit into that, but I would say that this much rather fits an over than it does an under. How can you back Carr? We did 2 weeks ago, Murray, against the Giants. It worked out very well. I hear you, though. It's been ugly for Carr at some points as well. Greg Pierce, you should retweet the series of tweets you created a couple years ago about the perils of market splits. Those got a good reception, so maybe we'll have more on those too. And Gerard confirming the weather, 68 and sunny here in Tampa on Sunday. 7 degrees away from Joe Nichols, sunny and 75. San Francisco on the road at the Washington Commanders. 49ers, a 13-point favorite. Most shops that matter, 12.5 at a lot that do not. But it is out there. Total in this game, 49.5, shaded higher towards the 50. I would have loved to fade Washington in this spot with the 49ers bouncing back from that Monday night game. However, Jacoby Brissett is in line to start for the Commanders this week, and that is reason enough for me to give pause. The reasons I wanted to fade Washington: 1, Ron Rivera is done, and he knows it. Ownership is going to get rid of him at the end of the season. It's going to be a fresh start with the new owners in their second year. We're going to see the Commanders change tone. The team, the defense, it's not as bad as what we saw with the Chargers. It's just quit. I mean, the Commanders, they're just a dead team at this point. The one person that can revive them and keep them going for another 2 weeks is Jacoby Brissett. We've seen him come in relief after Howell has been benched the last couple of weeks, and the team just plays so hard for the guy. They really, really like him in the locker room. He gets McLaurin involved. the offense just looks so different with Brissett. And I don't know if he should be the starter. I don't want to get into that debate, but the Commanders are a dead team with Howell at quarterback because nobody wants to play for him. He keeps getting sacked. He holds on to the ball for so long. McLaurin disappears. It's a dead team with Howell at quarterback. But with Jacoby, there's opportunity there. And we saw this team really fight for him last week against the Jets in a game that, quite honestly, they should have come back and won. But just like to the dead point, again, I bring up that broadcast for the Jets game. You might even catch some of it in highlights, but like it was mistakes and penalties and misformations and flags. And it was just, he was verbally getting pummeled, Rivera was, by the commentators about how sloppy the Commanders looked, how disjointed they were, how poorly coached they were. Like, it's really bad for Washington. And then Brissett came in and it was like a completely different team. And so that gives me a little bit of worry. There's the lingering potential that Purdy has an actual injury and it wasn't just kind of thrown out there as an excuse to bench him without saying the word bench officially. And it would be the second injury / stinger to the same area on his shoulder. I don't know the full extent of it because these stinger injuries are always really difficult to kind of gauge. A lot of the medical folks around Twitter in the football space seem to think that the second injury could actually be limiting somewhat. And so that becomes an interesting thing to look at too. And so, again, this is kind of another stay away in a way for me. Would have loved to look at a way to back the 49ers, but with Jacoby starting and kind of uncertainty about the 49ers at QB a little bit, kind of keeps me off of this one for now, but that may change later in the week. Maybe we'll drop something in the comments. Eric says, can't believe I'm saying this, but go commies, riverboat Ron to the promised land. That riverboat needs to go away about as much as Tommy Cutlets does as well. Connor says, I don't know what Ron Rivera does well. I don't know either. Different time in a different era. He was very, very good, but now he's just an old coach that needs to go. Jets Pete says, backdoor is wide open. With Jacoby, it may most certainly be, for sure. Jets Pete, interesting. My Washington friends seem to think there is an edict. Ooh, got me on that one. There's an edict from new owner Harris to protect the high draft pick, and that is why Brissett didn't start this week. I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one, Pete, because they put him in now. Trent Williams is huge if he's out. This is a great point by Ryan Morrow. The 49ers top level starting talent versus the second level talent is as big of a dichotomy as there is league wide. And we saw when Williams was out earlier in the year, it looked like a completely different offense. Like, he matters so much to this offense and this scheme. And when you start just taking starters out of the 49ers lineup, it is so different. So that's a really good point by Ryan for sure. Joe English says, Ron Rivera beat cancer. Let's be nice. That's true. As a cancer survivor myself, I get that sentiment, but it does not make me nor him void of criticism for just doing a horrible job at something that they do. It's not a lifetime excuse to get by, especially when you're one of 32 at something in the world and you're doing a really, really terrible job at doing it like Rivera has done this season. So I get the sentiment, but let's not give him a pass for how terrible he has been all season long. Afternoon games. Here we go. Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks, a 3.5-point favorite with a total in this game of 41. Seahawks laying the number or nothing. Another game that I say that just because have not acted on it, have not done anything with it, but would only be looking to Seattle in this spot. The Steelers game last week, something we released on the service very late. It's set up to be such a good spot for Pittsburgh against Cincinnati. The way that number held and the way that it set up, that was just everything fell right for the Steelers as dogs at home, with Cincinnati being overinflated, with the defense for Cincinnati being as bad as it is, with all of the yards after the catch that aided Mason Rudolph in his start to inflate that score line, to inflate the yards per play, to inflate the yards gained. It was just a game where everything fell right for Pittsburgh. And then you have the red zone turnovers to boot. Like that was just that one-off game where everything clicked for Pittsburgh. Now, week 2 of Mason Rudolph era with Kenny Pickett eligible to come back, but it's already been announced that Rudolph will be the starter. I think this is a much more difficult spot as you're going cross country to play in Seattle. Now you kind of get a look at what Rudolph did, and really he didn't do a whole lot. It was Pickens after the catch doing a lot of everything. This game is fully on the Seahawks defensive line to step up and slow down the Steelers' run game. As bad as the Seahawks defense has been the last 6 weeks, there is so much name value and talent hidden within this defense that it's crazy to me that they haven't shown up and had a big game in basically 2.5 months. It is really, really bizarre to me that this defense has not stepped up. Now with the season on the line, you would think if there's a spot to do it against a third-string quarterback at home, this is the spot where it shows up. Confidence level in that happening, not super high, but it's now or nothing for Seattle, specifically on this defense. And what do you get from Pete Carroll in this spot? You would hope a whole lot. You would hope that this is the all-in performance to keep the season alive, because the opponent in Pittsburgh certainly sets up as an offense that you could do it against. And so the way that Seattle, too, as we go to the other side of the ball, move the football against Dallas, to me is something that's always kind of lingering in the background as well. Geno Smith, more than figured out at this point, downtrending, but you get a Steelers defense that won't have leading tackler Landon Roberts, who is very likely still going to miss both starting safeties, KZ suspended, and you have Fitzpatrick still dealing with the injury. So that there's plenty of opportunity for these wide receivers to find big plays downfield. The Steelers with Porter potentially matching up against Metcalf, but you're going to look to other guys. There's a path here for Seattle to certainly move the football. And to me, this is what does the Seahawks defense do against the run game for Pittsburgh? Because I don't see Mason Rudolph having a repeat performance of what he did against Cincinnati from a counting stats perspective, which was just incredibly inflated by yards after the catch. So to me, this is a night and day spot for Pittsburgh off of the win. I got to have a spot for Seattle at home. I think we see the Seahawks defense show up. Could only look at Seahawks laying the points here or nothing. Michael Berkowitz, wildcard teams fits the over criteria. Does, but it's out of conference. Again, I know this is why trends and angles are so tough. And the reason that I've kind of been focusing on the in-conference spots is because there is that level of familiarity and because it matters immediately. It's essentially two games with it. You add a loss one way and a win other. It's so much more impactful with this, with it being out of conference. A Seahawks win impacts the Steelers with a loss, but it doesn't give them an opponent right in that wild card spot with the other win. And so, yes, we're still going to see the desperation. Yes, we're still going to see everything kind of play out the way it has with these other spots, but it's not that in-conference game. What I would say about this game, too, one final thought, is on that over specifically, we're probably going to see under money come in between now and kickoff. The reason being is when you think about Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin in a game of this importance, if there's two coaches that you think about that could kind of divert and rein things in a little bit, I mean, right now, league-wide, those are kind of the two guys that would fit that criteria of potentially going and tightening up a little bit rather than letting it fly. So not only is it a interconference game, but you have two coaches that you kind of look at and go like, this could get kind of botched down the way. So I think there is going to be under money that comes in. So if you do like the over, I would say wait till closer to kickoff. You're probably going to see it on the other side of 41 come back. Cincinnati Bengals on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. I'll restart this in a second. Brooks out at linebacker is big for our defense. Very big for sure. Agree with that too. Pizzola has the under. I saw that with Nick and Ken yesterday as well. I think the people will follow that in too, and we see the under in that game too. So I agree with that as well. I think we see it come down. Bengals on the road at the Chiefs. Kansas City continues to slide. Money on the Bengals continues to come into the market. KC 7, minus 102 at Chris, 7 minus 108 at DK, 7 flat everywhere else. Ace is actually showing 6.5 minus 120. My goodness. And this was a game that was higher at 8.5 earlier in the week. So it's been Bengals money all the way through. Total in this game, open 44, still sitting at 44 currently. I would expect if Jamar Chase is ruled in, for there to be continued Bengals sentiment in the market coming in, and this number, boy, if it gets off of the 7, I mean, the Bengals are becoming an incredibly popular side this week, and they're getting bet like it too, and we're seeing this number crash in. I would be curious to see how far this slides. The reason being, the Chiefs box score wise last week against the Raiders dominated. Defensively, they dominated as well. The Raiders offense did nothing. And it's another backup quarterback coming in against Spags. Like, even with Chase on the field, I don't know how excited anybody is about the potential output for the Bengals offense in this spot on the road against this Chiefs defense. I think this is a really, really tough spot for Cincinnati to do a whole lot in terms of moving the football. The question is, for this Chiefs offense, which is just becoming beyond frustrating for anybody that follows the team, anybody that's betting on them, anybody that's playing them in teasers. The question is, like, we just saw a Steelers offense, again, aided by a lot of yak, with Mason Rudolph, move the football consistently on this Bengals defense. I mean, Cincinnati has been stopping nobody for a very long time. You start to look at some of the Bengals scores too. And like, you think about it, they give up 34 to the Steelers. They give up 24 to the Vikings with Nick Mullins. They give up 14 to the Colts with Minshew, 31 to an injured Trevor Lawrence. Like, you can move the football at will on the Bengals defense. The Cincinnati Bengals also struggle immensely to defend tight ends. One of the worst teams in the league at defending tight ends. And so if you're looking at a path for the Chiefs offense to do something, well, this is the game where Travis Kelce has to show back up. And you start to see the body language of the Chiefs players, specifically Mahomes. I've never seen him this frustrated. I've never seen him this visually annoyed. And it's whether it's on field, it's walking into the stadium, it's walking out to the stadium. It's ugly all the way around for the Chiefs within the locker room, what Mahomes is doing. This, like, distraction that Kelce has brought on to the team and himself, you have to wonder, in addition to the injuries that he's quietly dealing with, when does that kind of come to a head? And then he has to, like, come through with the big game. If it sets up for it, the Bengals are the perfect opponent for that to kind of finally come through and for there to be a breakout. And so I see a spot where the Chiefs can move it. And I don't know if the Bengals are going to be able to just run the football consistently on the Chiefs and score into the mid 20s in this game, where the Chiefs offensive output is just out of reach. I don't know. Now, again, my hesitation here, you see the Chiefs above 7.5, markets completely siding with Cincinnati as this number continues to slide. As popular as Cincinnati might be, the market's crashing with them too. So that gives me some hesitation here for the Chiefs, but I'm not super excited about the prospects of getting 7 with the Bengals at the current number, going in with Browning to face this Chiefs defense. I think that's a pretty tall task for him to deal with. So again, Chiefs are nothing, but it's very likely going to be nothing for me in this game. So let's see where this market continues to trend. But those Kelce props, something to keep in the back of your mind. 2 games left to go. Chargers on the road at the Denver Broncos. This is a fun one to talk about. Broncos currently a 3.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 37 shaded under. Lots of 36.5s beginning to show. So yesterday is really what we need to focus on with this game. Russell Wilson, who has apparently been told behind the scenes he's going to be benched for the last 2 months, gets benched, whether it's Peyton finally having enough, whether it's actually the contract situation that they're trying to get rid of, who knows? What we do know is Russell Wilson is not going to play this week, and Jarrett Stidham, for the second season in a row, becomes the salary cap fall guy at quarterback for the superstar who's being run out of town. Same thing happened with Derek Carr last season. Carr didn't show up for the last 2 weeks. McDaniels had his guy in Stidham. Stidham showed up, had 2 big games. Same thing's happening now with the Denver Broncos. So we were sitting at 5.5 initially when this number was widely available and open. There was money coming in on the Chargers. It got to 5. The news that Wilson was benched brought this number down to Broncos -3. Multiple pros that I speak with and text with over a weekly basis went in and bet Denver immediately. And the thought process behind betting Denver at -3 was Wilson to Stidham is not deserving of that drop, which we can call it from Broncos -5 to Broncos -3. And the view was, that's too much. I'm going to lay 3 because of that. And the fact that the Chargers are a dead team with Giff Smith as the head coach that got their big spot last week, which we talked about on the pod. Chargers plus the points was an easy cover. They got that bounce back in that traditional spot where the GM and head coach and everyone's cleared out. You get that motivational effort at home hosting the Bills. Now it's the Chargers going on the road into Denver. It's not going to look as good with Easton Stick traveling on the road to play the Broncos defense. And so it kind of all came together, and we saw the market go from 3 to 3.5. I will say at the time that this news happened, I was driving and I was sitting driving and I was like, my first thought aligned with everything that I just said. I was like, that's a big drop, kind of like the Broncos here, like it with Stidham, want to lay the points with Denver. Like, I get it. And then it got bet and I kind of cooled on that. And I'm like, that's 3.5. Now we'll see. This morning before the show, I went in and looked and I was like, how bad was Russell Wilson? And how bad is this being made out to be? Because I saw the Sean Payton press conference yesterday, and Payton does an exceptional job of finding people within the team and organization to blame who are not named Sean Payton. Arguably, he does it as well as any head coach has ever done it in the league. It's never a Sean Payton problem. It's always somebody else. And so when he was saying, I can't replace the entire offensive line, I can't replace all the wide receivers, we're finding a way to win this week. My focus is on this week. Well, the focus has been on this week for the whole season, and he hasn't found the way to win at all. I don't think Jarrett Stidham is going to necessarily fix that. And so I went back and looked, and I'm like, is this justified for him to be blaming Russell Wilson for all these mistakes and all this losing? We talked about the Aiden O'Connell metric earlier in the show, how Aiden O'Connell is 40th of starting quarterbacks in the league. If you do the same sort over on rbsdm.com and you look at the EPA plus CPOA composite, but instead you do the whole season and you look at it because Wilson's been the starter since week 1. So you do the full league sort from 1 all the way down to 30 for any quarterback who has been in the game for at least 272 plays. Now, if I was to tell you there were 30 quarterbacks that fit that criteria, right now, as you're watching this, think in your mind, where would you rank Russell Wilson from 1 to 30? There's been 30 quarterbacks in the league this season who have had at least 272 snaps under center, 30 QBs, 272 snaps, EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Where between 1 and 30 do you rank Russell Wilson? The answer for the season, Russell Wilson is ranked 12th in the NFL. And so where I start to have a little bit of disagreement maybe with the sentiment that the line has moved too far. We had some good guesses. 16th for Connor. I should have left it a little bit more and drawn it out a little bit. Gave the answer a little bit. Ryan was right. He said 12. Gerard said 15. Where I kind of see disagreement with this is I don't think Jarrett Stidham steps into this offense and immediately plays to the 12th best quarterback so far this season level. I think that the drop is probably putting him in, like, I don't know, what are you getting at a best game from Stidham? Like 24th, 25th? What does that look like if Cortland Sutton, who's on the injury report, doesn't play, their top wide receiver? Is that going to be 30th? Is that going to fall further? Like, I get the sentiment that the drop can be too big and that, like, the team just wants Wilson out of there. Like, I understand that, and I can see the motivational aspect. But it's kind of asking Jarrett Stidham to come in and do a lot against this Chargers team, as bad as it might be, especially if Palmer doesn't go and it doesn't look like Allen's going to play. I don't know if I feel as adamantly about the Broncos side now, kind of putting the Russell Wilson performance season-wide into context, just assuming that a Broncos team that hasn't been able to win or cover by margin all season, now going to Jarrett Stidham, as bad as the Chargers might be, are going to get that same level of play. So that's kind of how I look at it. Nathan says, I fell off my chair, sprinted to the window to bet the Broncos when this hit -3 yesterday. I get it, and I agree with that. But I just, I don't know. And again, Connor summed it up well. I think Peyton will do more with Stidham. The Peyton and Wilson stuff seems personal. So that to me is the big angle here. If you think that Peyton and Wilson just have this like butting heads personality, and now that he's out of there, this offense is going to open up and Peyton's going to be, I fully get that. That's what you're looking at. That's the angle you're playing into here, more than the number dropped too far, because W says it right. Stidham hasn't played in 16 weeks. He can't be 12th. I agree with that too. So that's how I look at it. And the reason I'm referencing 12th is we're at 3.5 now. If you're betting 3.5, you're probably not thinking the Broncos are going to win by 4. You're probably looking at it higher than that, which you're going to need that same level of play, because this is 5 before the Wilson news. And so, like, if you're going to bet it here, you're basically saying that Stidham is going to equal that level of play that Russ was at, which I just don't know. And so, good point here by Nathan. He'll let it fly. He wants to make Wilson look like a fool. That's the angle. That's what you're betting into if you like the Broncos, more than the drop was too much, in my opinion. Sunday Night Football, Packers on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. This game is off of the board at Chris. It went off like 5 minutes ago. I don't know if that is. There's why. I just got the injury alert. Jaren Hall expected to start for the Minnesota Vikings. That is why the game just went off of the board, was just announced. Wow. So the Vikings season is on the line. And despite seeing Nick Mullins go for 400 plus yards and have a bigger game too against the Cincinnati Bengals, the Vikings saying, that's enough. We're going to go to Jaren Hall, the rookie, with the season on the line at home, and TJ Hawkinson out for the season with a knee injury. All right. I have no idea what to think about that. So I will go maybe over the line here, maybe not. We have a support chat through the raspicks.com portal where people can go in and ask support questions, and Parker's brilliant at running it. And we pride ourselves on having really good customer support. And I got in like a really long back and forth, just talking Minnesota Vikings football with somebody who is a subscriber who follows the team very closely and is a very good bettor himself. And this was in the game where it was unclear if it was going to be Dobbs, Mullins, or Hall a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember which specific one. Maybe the Chicago game on Monday night. I can't remember. It was a while back. And he was really adamant that Hall should be the starter. And he was the first person that I had talked to really all season that spoke highly about Jaren Hall and wanted him to be the starter. And I don't know a lot about Jaren Hall other than he brings with him like true mobility, unlike Josh Dobbs, but is also a pretty prolific runner. And I say true tongue in cheek, you know my stance on Josh Dobbs. I think O'Connell is where I'm kind of piecing this together as I put it through in my mind. O'Connell's a really big gambler as a play caller, not necessarily in like the on-field decisions that he makes, but he just wants to win games with his offense, going all out to do everything they can to get it. Preseason, he was talking about wanting to win games 40-30. And it's clear that that tone has really changed because the Dobbs benching was entirely related to interceptions. He had this long-winded press conference about how his decision on who was playing quarterback was going to be dictated by who he thought gave the team the best opportunity not to turn the ball over. And that's why they went from Dobbs after that big interception game to Mullins. And now I think are going from Mullins after his big interception game to Jaren Hall. I think O'Connell is kind of changing his tone in the way that he just wants someone that's not going to turn it over. And I wonder now, after burning through two different quarterbacks with Hall starting, if this is the decision made, not because he thinks that Hall is going to give them the best opportunity to open things up downfield, but rather that Hall is going to be a guy that he can control, not to make the bad passes and the turnovers. I don't know. I don't know a lot about him. What I do know in this matchup is we're talking about this wild card angle that has been leading to all these overs, 9 straight. This is the one game on the board that fits that angle this week. You have these two teams both in wild card spots playing each other in the division. This is the game where you're going to get all of the desperation, all of the fourth down decision making, all of the pushing. And unlike a Steelers Seahawks game, for example, interconference, but we talked about how it's Tomlin and Carroll, like two coaches you can really look at getting super tight and conservative and taking that over off the rails, despite those both being wildcard teams. But this game is LaFleur and O'Connell, two coaches that I would view in a very opposite manner, right? And so this is a game that has seen over money from the jump. If you listen to the podcast Sunday night, it was 43.5. And it's like, you're firing on the over. Like, this number is only going to go up just because of the way that the Packers defense is playing now without Jair Alexander, the way that the Vikings offense had been playing with Nick Mullins and Justin Jefferson back. Like, everything about this screams to the over. I don't know if Hall is good or bad for the over. I just don't know at the spot. I was ready to talk about how Nick Mullins was a very, very good thing for the over and still advocate for the over at 46 and 46.5 with the angle and the way that these two teams were trending and playing. I thought that it was going to be a very good look. Now with Hall in, I don't know enough about the guy to say that it's still the same thing and it's still the same way. I don't know. Jacob says Mullins loves to give the ball away. Too many turnovers all season for the purple, especially the last few weeks. And that was part of the benefit with Mullins is you got scores both ways. Big plays downfield, turnovers coming back the other way. So Connor says brutal spot for a rookie. I agree with that too. I don't know. But this to me, just taking him out of the picture here, I trust KOC to cook something in a single game against a morbid Joe Barry defense. That's the angle here that you're looking at when you're considering this game too. Michael says, how are the Packers not reopening as a favorite? The only explanation that I could have there is that just the market did not hold Mullins in high regard after those couple turnovers. There wasn't a significant difference between Dobbs and Mullins on the point spread when that switch was made. And I guess how much lower are you going to go when you're going from a third to a fourth string QB? So I'm seeing pick right now, Chris. So there was a bit of a move, but again, it would be over or nothing for me in this game. But obviously the huge caveat as we have this in live stream reaction is that I don't know enough about Jaren Hall. But the one sort of reference point that I do have from that chat is that there was a lot of excitement about what he could potentially do. And if you buy into the fact that O'Connell wants a guy that he can trust under center for a game this big, and he's selecting Hall to be that guy, maybe that tells you all you need to know. 16 games up, 16 games down to talk about as we get to the end of the live stream. An hour and 38 minutes, the longest yet, as I'm getting going downhill. And once I get rolling talking about football, there's no stopping it. So this was a good example of that as these shows continue to bleed a little bit longer. Next week's schedule, before you guys go, I'll keep everybody updated. I get the impression, based on how this week went, with games finishing New Year's Eve and then New Year's Day with all the college games and everything else going on, plus it being a holiday for most, we're probably going to see everything for week 18 with no pre-existing market and no look-aheads being posted. I think we're going to see the openers delayed. So that may not only impact the podcast on Sunday night, it may very well impact this live stream next week too. If I would have done this live stream yesterday, there would have been 8 or 9 games on the board that I would have said, I have no thoughts here because you have to wait for this, and this. And at least today I was able to give for all of those, or at least most of them, a thought on what to look at. And so I want to do the same thing with week 18 as well. So I'll keep everybody updated. It may be pushed back to Thursday as well. Maybe even a Friday morning stream. I'll keep everybody up to date on that one too. So let's see. I'll keep you in the loop through Twitter. Thanks, Adam from Insight. Thank you for tuning in. Ryan Roberts says 2 hours. It might need 2 hours with the way some of these matchups look next week too. Kyle says the total is going up. There was a question. What did Chris reopen at? Reopened 45, now trending up a little bit higher too. Nathan says favorite sides totals this week other than Colts. Colts is all I have the definitive opinion on. A few others I'm waiting on. I guess Eagles would be one I kind of have circled. Just waiting on that Murray news. But the only thing we've sent out through the service, the only thing I'm involved with right now is Colts at 3. Would still look that way at 3.5 too. Zach Moss says, fantastic as always, Adam. Thank you. Hopefully you're playing for the Colts on Sunday too. Gerard says, thanks, Adam. Great stuff. Have a happy new year. Same thing to everybody else. Happy new year. Carl says, thanks, Adam. Toto as well saying hi. Devin says, Nesson coming out later. Yes, it will be. It'll be a weird clip as well. Happy New Year to Joe English, Murray, Nathan, Garrett, Austin, 24-hour stream not happening, and Carlo as well joining in. Happy New Year to each of you guys as well. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, that is down below before you get on your way out. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy week 17. Happy New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's Day. We'll see you guys next week back here on the channel. I'll keep you all updated with the time that this show will go live. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you next week on the next live stream.